Okay, I don't need it, but I know sometimes, not true with the Kiwanis, but at least Rotary, a lot of people don't hear very well. So. I am pleased to be invited here. What I wound up being involved in is a lot like so many of the service organizations in this area, especially Kiwanis, with the global organization of volunteers dedicated to changing the world, one child and one community at a time. And so I started reflecting back on why I'm in Detroit Lakes at a Peace Center. That isn't exactly what I had in mind when I was going to retire. I was looking to go someplace a little warmer. I'm very pleased to be here because I realize what a treasure Detroit Lakes is, the people and the organizations that are here. It's quite amazing. One of my hobbies is photography, and so I decided I would go back and look at my pictures and see how I wound up here. And so I'm going to go back a little bit of history. Maybe it'll be something where it'll bring back some memories for other people who are a little older. Just click on one more click here, I'll be ready to go. So I actually literally decided to start at the beginning. I was born at a very early age, as they say. I was born in February 1941, and I'm trying to look at the bigger picture of the history of how I wound up here. Well, I was pretty naive in those days, and still am perhaps, but as I was growing up, I didn't realize what was going on behind the scenes. The same year I was born, on December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese. And our response was not a peaceful one, but an appropriate one, perhaps at that time. A lot of what we've become involved in has been involved with world peace. And so I guess if there's a theme that's resulted in my life, it's been about creating peace. That peace begins within each of us, body, mind, spirit, as we were just talking about. And so it starts with each of us, goes out to our communities and out to the world. Well, about the time I was involved during World War II, Ruth Ann was moved to Detroit Lakes, and World War II came to a conclusion, at least the Japanese part, by the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. After the bombing, Amanda McCoy Sensei was contemplating what could be done to help create world peace. And he came up with the words, "May peace prevail on earth." And that movement has grown, and One Heart, One Mind has become part of that movement. About the time that McCoy Sensei was contemplating world peace, I was a cowboy gunslinger. And that's when I took up photography as I got a little older and realized that my first Brownie Hawkeye, and I've had dozens of cameras and video cameras since then with many, many thousands of pictures and so forth. Grew up in a very traditional family in the Vulcanized coastal area of the Twin Cities, Lutheran church, baptized, confirmed in the church and so forth. About the time I was doing that, Ruth Ann was in Detroit Lakes and was sponsored to go to, as an exchange student, to West Germany. And perhaps her, I don't know if her thinking about peace was that or not, but she told me one time that she had taken wire cutters underneath her dress and went to the Berlin Wall and cut out a piece of the barbed wire to bring back to Detroit Lakes. Well, I saw the light after I was being a gunslinging cowboy. I decided that I would do something different. I wound up working at YMCA camps in Croydon Heights, Wisconsin, and was in India, so on the right there. About the time I was doing that, I got my first car, which had all the modern safety features on it, including a high beam for a front bumper. I lived in the Vulcanized Roseville area, traditional middle class. Graduated from Alexander Ramsey High School, and I thought of myself as being Norwegian. Went to St. Olaf College, and I realized that a lot of that had to do with the fact that my father's side was German, my mother's was Norwegian. And I guess again, pretty naive. After World War I, World War II, a lot of people didn't talk about their German background, but we certainly talked about the Norwegian, and wound up going to the University of Oslo for summer school, and then bumming around Europe for 6 months. What happened in St. Olaf, I was not happy there, and the counselor said, why? And they said, well, I understand Norwegian middle-class Lutheran Minnesota, I want to see the rest of the world. He said, well, go do it. So I did. I went to, bummed around Europe, like I said, for 6 months on a motor scooter. Joined the Navy, was able to get in as a supply corps officer, which is the business end of the Navy, which was great. Stationed aboard a helicopter carrier out of San Diego called USS Iwo Jima, which this was during the Vietnam conflict. So I mainly put on beach parties and did things in Vietnam. My first job aboard the ship was to make sure that our hard-earned tax dollars were well spent. See that picture but in doing that, we also went to Japan and other parts of the Orient, so an opportunity to get to know the Japanese people and really enjoyed that whole culture. Many years after I left the ship, I met Jim Lovell, who was the commander of Apollo 13 and the USS Iwo Jima. After I left it, had picked them up when they came back to Earth. Got married, had 4 beautiful children, wonderful children, very active lifestyle, loved to ski and so forth. My father had started a food brokerage business in the Twin Cities, selling retail food service and ingredients. I took it over, became president, and eventually focused more on the ingredient area, which is like selling Sunday raisins and diamond walnuts to General Mills to put in their products. But I still had the passion for travel and to learn about other cultures, and I think that's a huge part of helping to create peace. Spent time in Egypt, and at those times video cameras were bigger and, and electricity wasn't as easy to come by. At the time I was doing that, just kind of reflecting back, Ruth Ann was a typical woman who would dress more like this. Then she wound up getting her CPA. She was one of the first CPAs in Minnesota, and changed and became actually in the magazine. They were talking about a picture of her, how women should dress for business with a shirt and tie. Changed again. So I was divorced, met Ruth Ann at a ballroom dance studio, Arthur Murray in Minneapolis, and we eventually wound up owning a couple dance studios. But I was afraid to dance and thought I should do that if I was single, and she loved to dance. We met one night and we were together probably every night since then. So we did get married, and again did many different things, including having a ballroom dance studio, which we had called In the Mood in the Twin Cities, and another one called Dance in the Park eventually. We realized that the lifestyle, we both had condominiums downtown Minneapolis, and we loved the life there. However, we realized that things were changing in the world, and we felt we wanted to be back in someplace other than the big city. We said, we didn't want to be on the ocean, didn't want to be on fault lines. Where would be a good, stable place to be? Well, out in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. And so it was, of course, her family farm, 120 acres. We purchased that and bought out the other kids, and then added a few more acres to it. So we moved to Detroit Lakes, sold everything we had in the Twin Cities. Ruth had to build a house for her parents, a roundhouse down by the environmental lake called Lake Kennedy, and we built another house on top of the hill. As time went on, rather than being our place, we realized we were doing much more work with other people and other cultures and other backgrounds and other teachings and so forth. One of the groups, as an example, was the Tibetan monks that were here. We didn't really do much in terms of having a website or do anything locally here, but just people from around the country heard about these things that would come, these different programs. So my passion for travel continued. Went to Uganda, helped them with a couple of projects. They gave me a cow, which how do you get that back to Minnesota? I didn't want to take hamburgers, so I said I'd come back and get the baby someday. I didn't realize how out the bush I was going to be. There was no electricity, no running water, nothing to speak of out there. I was just in a cow dung hut. And so they gave me the cow. I asked to have my picture taken by the cow. That cow took its horn and ripped up the whole side of my pants. Luckily, it touched the skin a little bit. So anyway, I'm glad my wife provided a little emergency kit for me to take with. I didn't everything I needed. So in 1991, before that, we met a woman named Ruth Ann Ranstrom, and the three of us became partners and working on different projects together. And we formed a company, a nonprofit called One Heart, One Mind. So One Heart, One Mind is a peace organization in service to humanity, providing physical, mental, and spiritual offerings, including life-changing workshops, seminars, and retreats. In 1992, we had our symbol. Our symbol, and continued on. So we traveled around the world doing different work with different particular cultural groups. One of the first ones, we spent 40 days and 40 nights primarily camping out with the Aborigines in Australia, with Ann Love, her camel, so I'm showing that picture. So we had a great experience there and connected with many very interesting groups and people. So those travels have taken us other places. In Australia, we were given a eagle feather, which nowadays you can't take on planes and so forth, but we were given the eagle feather, and we went and were with the Karo Indians in Peru, which had kept away from Western civilizations forever, I guess. Stayed on top of the mountains, and they were ready to start coming down and connecting. And so we presented them with the eagle feather. Their prophecy said that when the condor and the eagle meet, there will be peace on earth. So this is Alsingati, their sacred mountain, in their lagoon up there. So yeah, the man who was the head of the group was like 105, and his son was like 80. He's still learning from his dad. After that, we had a group call us, Japanese, it was a group of 6 Japanese that came from Japan. They had brought with them 10 peace poles, didn't know a person in Minnesota. Went to Duluth, and the mayor dedicated a peace pole there, and they heard about One Heart, One Mind, called us and said, would you like to be involved? And that's developed a long-term relationship which is still ongoing. So the World Peace Prayer Society, it's www.worldpeace.org if you wanted to take a look at it. That main theme of May Peace Prevail on Earth, which I mentioned earlier, was from Goei Sensei, and he started doing that. Well, we're followers of Jesus Christ, and so we love to connect with all the cultures of the world, but we said, may the Prince of Peace prevail on earth in our card. So the peace poles became one of the visible things, signs of what we've been working on. So many groups have dedicated peace poles, many individuals from the Pope to the Dalai Lama to many different cultural groups around the world. And many children have been involved in this. They've got many children's programs as well. Art contests and many different things like that. So there's of course, a huge desire in a lot of children's parks to have peace on this earth also. We were in Egypt, and here's one of the peace poles at a giant pyramid, which I spent time inside of and on top of. So the third person is with Ann, myself. The third person is Diane Gehrke, and Diane is on the left. And she, her permanent home's in Hopkins, but she spends most of her time at the Peace Center here in Detroit Lakes. And it's because of her a lot of this has existed. We call her the Heart of One Heart, One Mind. The picture here is with Masami Shianji, who is the current head of the World Peace Prayer Society from Japan. We're here with the Japanese board in Tokyo. Their peace centers in Mount Fuji area. They have a flag for every country of the world, a peace pole for every country of the world. And that peace pole, of course, has that language of that country, the primary language of that country on the peace poles. So we spent time in Japan at the Peace Center. The current head of the World Peace Prayer Society of the United States is Fumi John. This is a picture of her here. She spends part of her time in San Francisco, part in Japan, and part in New York. She has been here at Detroit Lakes many times. This is the time she came, and although men usually do it, she was able to be taught and give us a formal Japanese tea ceremony. So this is their headquarters in Wassiack, New York. So many different groups have been to our organization, adults, children, and groups to participate in peace pole projects. So this is a couple of peace poles at the Vantage Point Peace Center. We have 2 of them there. We also have flags for every country of the world, and so we'll actually pray for each country of the world individually. There are peace poles, over 240,000 of them around the world. I'm sure it's more than that now. Every time I look, the number's gone up quite a bit. But it's every country of the world, and so here's an example of the peace pole on the border between North Dakota and Canada at the Peace Park. This is the peace pole we dedicated at the State Fairgrounds, Diane there. This is the one at the Itasca State Park we dedicated. And this peace pole, they were nice enough to put a plaque up there I saw, and so I'm going to read what it says. It's a little summary. So Masahisa Goi, the man who founded it, said, "We are facing an age where politics of the world must be carried out by each individual. Every individual repeats the words, may peace prevail on earth, thus becomes a great force for realizing peace in the world. Founded in 1955, the World Peace Prayer Society, a nonprofit, non-sectarian organization, the International Peace Bowl Project serves to uplift humankind towards harmony rather than conflict. It is a symbol for peace in the family, within communities, between cultures, and throughout all countries. Currently, there are over 250,000 peace bowls in over 180 countries bearing the message, "May peace prevail on earth," in over 300 languages. Tasca State Park's Peace Bowl is number 698. It was dedicated in 1996. So that was one of the peace bowls we dedicated. The Japanese came over and we dedicated several peace bowls. So in 2001, we had 9/11 2001. Ruth Ann had found out that she had cancer earlier in the year, and she was in bed, and I was watching with her the TV when we observed this happening. Ruth Ann passed away December of 2001. She never really suffered. She had a great spirit, and talk a lot about a lot of things that happened, a lot more stories. I'm trying to hit some of the highlights. So anyway, the following year, Diane and I went to Ground Zero, and we dedicated things, and there's plenty of Sweden there. Ruth Ann was Swedish, 100% Swedish. We assisted some of the people at Ground Zero. There was a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of help with the firefighters, the police, people like that, but we worked with some of the civilians who were involved in this project, and they took us down into the hole, and we had to leave because they were finding more bodies. But this is one of the pictures. You can see the train tracks here, several levels below ground level, where they were just getting at the cars there below the rubble. From there, we went to Niagara Falls, and it really was quite an experience to be around that much dust and that much of a destruction. The Japanese World Peace Prayer Society dedicated a special peace bowl for 9/11. Among other journeys I've taken, it was in China. This is a picture of the brother of the last emperor of China doing calligraphy, and he did a poster for One Heart, One Mind for me. So our group has done many things. We used to have programs going on almost weekly at the Vantage Point Peace Center when Ruth Ann was around. I can give you many examples. One that comes to mind right now would be Dr. Daniel Penewell, a medical doctor from France, who was also a world expert on essential oils and healing. And so he came here, and he combined prayer with healing, with using the various essential oils. And there are people very much involved in this Detroit Lakes area, like Bonnie Juma. So another thing we did with our group, it keeps evolving. We wound up doing a foster care for 6 kids for a while. We dedicated other peace bowls. This one is at the Waban High School. Helen Kennedy had heard about the peace bowls and heard that we had one and called and asked if we would participate in that. Rotary, the district governor of Rotary last year came to our group, and he brought with him a peace bowl, and he said that the president of Rotary International was in Japan that year, and he suggested that Rotarians consider dedicating peace bowls the same as peace through service. And so it was exciting for me because we had a peace bowl to be dedicated. We had already done dedications at the Detroit Lakes Community and Cultural Center, where this peace bowl comes from. And the Japanese asked, what languages, what are you doing? You got 4 sides. I should have picked 8 and put another layer perhaps, but I just said, well, give me Norwegian, German, Swedish, and English. And then I thought, well, gosh, the Native Americans. So we had the Native Americans make a base over at the Tornado Learning Center for this pole. So this is a traveling pole that we put in at the Detroit Lake Community and Cultural Center. Most of the poles are permanently installed in cement. Now this is an example of the 2 kinds of poles. The white ones is what were produced in Japan and were brought here from Japan for us. So the Japanese brought 10 of these with us when they came. The wood ones are made in Michigan, and they're cedar. And so we have both kinds here in the Detroit Lakes area and around the country. The white ones are on the side, and so this is a Japanese exchange student, I believe, here in Detroit Lakes. So another example is we dedicated, here's the Boys and Girls Club, we dedicated a peace pole there in Bemidji. one of the things that's I was going to explain about the hollow peace bowls, we've got these things that are concentric circles that you can write inside those circles. And so it's a way of dedicating for peace. So you can put what you're grateful for, your prayers, as you wish in there. And so a lot of people make these circles, write in them. Diane does one every day. And so the one she's doing right now will probably go to a peace bowl to be dedicated in Crookston in the spring. So we're putting some of the circles inside the peace bowl here that's going to be dedicated at Detroit Lakes at the Rotary Club Park. So the essential St. Mary's Rotary Park is across the street from the Catholic Church. And so we had a dedication there a few months ago, well, fall, I guess. So Matt did a little proclamation, we released doves. And so there's a peace bowl I have here. Should have one here for Tanisha. Went with Tanisha's dad and some people to Jamaica a couple years ago and helped in doing some construction work there. So we continue to do different things for world peace. And so I showed you a picture of my 4 kids early on. The group is now grown and growing. In terms of working with different cultural groups, a lot of people kind of wonder, well, if you're a follower of Christ, you certainly seem to be connected with a lot of groups. Yes, and that way I was about a little over a week ago, I was at Minneapolis with the Dalai Lama. He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the only program going outside of Norway for the Nobel Peace Prize is done through the Christian churches in this area, primarily Augsburg right now. But he was at the convention center there, so it was with that. Just came back yesterday from the Natural Products Expo. I've been working with the food industry all my life, and food is part of keeping our temple strong and healthy and our minds alert. So still working to see what we can do in terms of health and nutrition to have a good life. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Kiwanians, just thinking about, and for Ruthann had a wonderful experience here, and so I'm very grateful for that. So may peace prevail on earth. Thank you very much. Yes?
You've shown us what organizations can do to promote peace. What can we do as individuals?
And I think what Kiwanis is doing is exactly what we can do as individuals. I think that connection primarily with our future, our children, which is what your focus is. And that, I think for me anyway, I've enjoyed so much connecting with other cultures. Really interesting. I just came from the expo in California. There were 60,000 people at that expo, all focusing on health and nutrition, and there were over 6,000 booths. And I was working with somebody from Vietnam, country that we were fighting, with coconut oil, because there's no finding out the value of coconut oil if it's not been processed, heavily processed. So all these things we do to help, and so helping hunger, nutrition, also any personal contacts. I just had such a great connection with this person from Vietnam, Vietnamese person, and just said, wow, it's like we are now good friends. So I think any connection we make, whether it's our family, our community, or the world at large, you're doing it. You're all doing it. In fact, I realize how much when I look at other cultures. I don't think anybody is like this Midwest area as far as what they really give to others. It's quite amazing. And they were telling me, by the way, that things are changing in China where China used to be against religion. In fact, I was in China, and I mentioned something about the Dalai Lama. I had actually given a building in South Minneapolis to a Tibetan community who gave it to the Tibetan monks, which became the Hutuwil Dharma Monastery. It was the Dalai Lama's first monastery in the United States. The building was a problem for me, and I just gave it away. And it was a blessing to get rid of it, and it was a blessing for them to have it. So anyway, I just mentioned about the Dalai Lama to the person I was with, and he said, well, if you're for the Dalai Lama, you're against China. I said, no, I'm for peace. It's like that. But I'm hearing now that China is changing, and they realize the value of the spiritual, the religious, the people that are really wanting peace, which includes many of the world's religions, including the Tibetan example. So they're realizing that the chaos and what's happening, and everybody's out there just for themselves. So our spiritual tradition here and our lifestyle, and maybe our winters, help us to really support each other, help each other, and so I think what's happening is awesome here, and it is spreading around the world. And I know with the modern technology, that's helping the communication. So I can be Skyping in Vietnam rather than going out and fighting there, you know. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it really is. I know that the first thing, again, that we need to do is start with ourselves. We need our own inner peace. And the reason I'm doing here, I already got back to the real basics of it, was not because I was excited about peace. I wanted peace internally myself. And I'd done everything the world said to do to be happy. I had a business, I had kids, I had boats, I had cars, I had a house in Gehrke, the whole thing, but I wasn't happy. So I wasn't at peace myself. So that personal quest for peace is what's led to what's going on now. So yeah, it helps to start with yourself, because if you're not peaceful, it's hard to pass it on. That's what I'm realizing anyway. So for me, it was a huge dramatic change. Once I went through a divorce and said my life was not working the way I'd been doing it, the spiritual wasn't as strong, the whole thing. And so I followed on, started in the Christian tradition, went around and did all the New Age, all the different Eastern thought, all the different teachings of different things, and came back to realizing that Christ is it. And love to be with all of them. I hang out with the Tibetan monks, listen to them chant all day long. So I don't see any conflict there, because and that's where people have difficulty, because one of the challenges of being in one heart, one mind, and perhaps one of the reasons I don't really talk much about it locally, people say, well, what are you? Are you Tibetan? Are you Lutheran? What are you? I said, well, I'm kind of the worldwide citizen interested in peace, and the Prince of Peace is Jesus Christ. So that's kind of where I'm coming from anyway, and that's kind of my story about it. And again, realize that not everybody's going to agree, for sure. A lot of people were, I assumed everybody would agree with may peace prevail on earth, like to see peace on earth. But even when we put the peace pole in at Itasca State Park, there was an ex-World War II veteran who was very angry that we were doing something that actually started in Japan. Still, and I understand that. It was a tough time. So we have a chance to, as individuals, to connect. And so Kiwanis, like the others, being connected around the world with our groups, we have those connections that are much more powerful than political. Like the politicians have their challenges, but we can work under the radar that way and work together.
So you mentioned something, there are 250,000 peace poles and all over the world. Did I hear that correctly?
Right,
And so most countries of the world have a peace pole somewhere on their land?
I don't think there's one country in the world that does not have a peace pole at this point. There was here, at this point we're talking up here, it hadn't been complete yet, but I don't know of any country. I've seen peace poles in several countries I've been in myself. Once you see them, you know what they are, you start paying attention. But I don't know if I've seen them in China. Actually, I'm not so sure about that.
Based on your experience, do you see the biggest impediment as being spiritual, political, or economic? What's holding the process back? What hurdles do you have?
Well, I think it's the peace comes from having, I guess the old Maslow pyramid, whatever. You need to have all the basics of your needs met before you can really be peaceful. If you don't have enough food, you don't have the economics and so forth. So when we're feeding children, when we're helping to communicate with all those things, it all helps. So I don't know that's the answer, but I don't think. For me, I just think myself, I need to make sure I'm peaceful within and carry it out to those I'm involved in, and then go out to the world. So I don't know if there's one that's more important than the other, but the body, mind, spirit, who was talking earlier about another, that's different words saying the same thing. If we don't have our head and our heart kind of connecting, if we aren't leading with our heart, we have some problems. So, there's still, certainly I now value totally the Christian religion, the ethic and the whole thing, but what happens here, I took it for granted. I thought everybody would be like this. I thought the Muslims would all think, oh, we all want peace. Well, I'm finding out that's not necessarily the case. because they've brought it to hate and to believe we're the bad guys and that sort of stuff. So I'm learning anyway, and it's all a journey, and that was my journey as to how I wound up here in Detroit Lakes, and I am very grateful to be here, and grateful for all of you. Thank you.
This is a little gift from Kiwanis.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you for being with us.